Welcome to the Path to Understanding podcast with wisdom from our neighborhood from Allison Ralph. The mission of Path to Understanding that we're currently considering adopting is gathering neighbors, growing trust. And our tagline is that we bring communities together. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that all of us are currently, at least here in Western Washington, standing on the traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and the Coast Salish peoples and pledge to work for our common, thriving future. Allison Ralph is a thought leader in religious pluralism and social cohesion. Allison brings 20 years of experience in strategy, research, and nonprofit and philanthropic leadership. She previously worked at the Aspen Institute, where I met her, where she served as Associate Director of the Religion and Society program and Director of its Religion and Philanthropy Institute. Allison has a PhD in church history from the Catholic University of America and a master's of philosophy from Cambridge University. Her graduate research focused on how societies manage or fail to manage their internal diversity and how they create and maintain social boundaries. Oh my gosh, Allison, I'll bet when you decided on that focus for your life, you weren't thinking it would be quite so important as it has become.
I knew that it would be central, and I did not realize to what degree.
Yeah.
I did not realize to what degree, that is for sure. Things are moving fast.
Yes, they are. And we'll get a chance to kind of talk about that and how we sort of see things. In a recent publication to the Foundation Review, I got to read that here last month or two, and I really found it to be informative. And you said that bridge building and advocacy movements are, quote, failing on their own. And before we get into why you say that, which we will get into that, what is at stake in the United States that's making bridge building and advocacy so important right now?
Oh my goodness. Well, first I want to just say thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with you today and to reconnect after we met back when I was in Aspen in the Wayback Machine. What is at stake? I think the possibility of human flourishing is at stake.
Yeah.
The ways that we first behave toward each other and what we allow our government to do to our neighbors, which means that we allow our government to do to ourselves.
Yes.
Those are becoming less human. And I say less human and not less humane.
Yes.
less human. Or to put all that in more academic terms, our norms and the structures of pluralistic democracy are shifting. And I think that's bad news for everybody.
Yeah.
So lots at stake.
Yeah, it feels like things are coming apart. And that's that feeling that our society is not, that we're diminishing in our capacity to see each other as human beings, both as people, as institutions and organizations, but also as our government is failing and is coming apart. And I really, that's why I left parish ministry to try to counter anti-Muslim bigotry so many years ago, is because I felt things slipping dangerously. And so before we kind of get into more about, this moment here, I would love to know, could you share your own personal why that drives you to engage in this work, Allison?
Yeah, absolutely. I wish we had more time to just talk about personal story. It's so important about
It is.
why we end up doing this incredibly difficult work. It is incredibly difficult and wonderful and lovely also, and it's really hard a lot of the time. I fell backwards into it. This was not my life plan at all. So I really just stumbled absolutely head over tea kettle. So imagine me at a pep rally in my freshman year of high school, small southern town.
Sure.
This girl that I call Carrie Ringer, I'm going to have to cuss a couple of times. I apologize in advance. So
That's
this
okay.
girl
Don't
that I
worry
call
about it.
Carrie Ringer. Okay. She leans over to me and she goes, "Try reading the Bible, bitch."
Nice.
Which is a really, really amazing line. Like pithy, hilarious, disturbing. And it was not that kind of experience was not unusual for
Right.
me
Right.
because I happened to grow up atheist in the small southern town.
Right.
I just did not have the experience with the divine. I didn't have
Sure.
a religious community in the same way
Sure.
so many other folks. I just don't remember my first conversation about this. I was in
Yeah.
fifth grade. Like, I just don't,
Wow.
I don't know what it is that you're feeling because I'm not feeling that.
Yeah.
So I'm a village atheist. And it's not just the kids who are
Sure.
saying the kinds of things that that kid
Of
said.
course. Of
It's
course.
the public school administration, the bus driver,
Yeah.
the teachers who all saw me as a religious outcast,
Yeah.
made me feel the religious outcast. Some of it I now realize was very well-meaning invitation to the revival. They really did. Some
Yeah.
of them want to save my soul.
Yeah.
Some of it was teachers who saw the bullying in their own classrooms and let it go on. In my public school earth-space science class, public school, evolution and creationism got equal time
Sure.
on the public school curriculum. Small southern town in the 90s, like, this is what it is.
Yep.
And my teacher in that particular class, that was where a lot of this bullying was focused. In that class, he kept a plaque about God's love on his wall right as you were walking out the door. He knew all of this was happening. He saw it, let it go on, never intervened. I finally got completely tired of it
Yeah.
about this whole situation. And one day I just swiped that plaque off the wall as I'm coming out of the class, and I marched it directly down to the front office and
Wow.
I handed it across the desk. And I said, "This is a violation of my First Amendment rights."
Wow.
And then I was suspended for stealing for 3 days.
Wow.
I don't think any of this is right. None of this is right. This is not what you're supposed to be doing if you're Christian. And that was the thing that drove me completely insane was the hypocrisy of it. I mean, this is the era of the WWJD bracelets. I don't know if you
Hmm.
remember those from the
Oh,
90s.
yes. Yes.
So WWJD, short for What Would Jesus Do? I'm pretty sure that Jesus would not spit on other people in the hallways. You know, it was so hypocritical, just was astonishing. And it was that turned me into a very angry atheist,
Yeah.
like Richard Dawkins, Christopher
Certainly.
Hitchens reading,
Certainly. Yeah.
angry person.
Yeah.
Uh, and I spent years I ended up doing religion and history in college, trying to figure out,
Yeah.
what is wrong with all of these Christian people. Because
Sure.
religious people in general, Christian people in particular, there is something wrong here.
Yeah.
Um, and I ended up getting an opportunity. I did that my undergrad, and then I had an opportunity to go to Cambridge. And when you go to Cambridge, you apply already for a master's. You apply with a research project like in hand.
Yeah.
So I wanted to study Augustine of Hippo, who's known for just war theory. Again, I'm trying to
Yes.
figure out
Yeah.
this history of Christian justification of violence. So I apply with that project to the history department, and I receive an acceptance letter from the divinity department, which was the first surprise.
Yeah.
But for a farm girl, Allison is not going to say no to going to Cambridge University. So off
Yeah.
I, pack myself. And I show up on my first day, and my classmates are a nun, a priest, and an Anglican seminarian.
Wow.
And I was, oh no,
Yeah.
I have done something terribly wrong.
Yeah.
This may not go well. And either being foolish or foolhardy, I said who I was. I'm not Christian,
Yeah.
and that I was interested in the history of Christian violence. And then the most amazing thing happened,
Yeah.
which is that they thought I was a little bit weird, but they did not think that I was illegitimate.
Yeah.
That was like an earth-shattering
Yeah.
experience
I'll
for
bet.
me.
I'll bet.
They accepted me, they included me, and they thought I was weird. Like, that's fine. And it turns out actually that's like the gold standard of pluralistic engagement. We
Yeah.
get to think that other people are like, I don't know what you're doing with that belief because I don't understand it. I don't get it. That's not where I arrive. That's not my tradition. None of that makes sense to me. And also, would you like to come to dinner?
Right.
That's that's the gold standard of real inclusion, a pluralistic inclusion.
Yeah.
and since then, I've spent my life continuing to study the history of why and how people exclude each other,
Hmm.
and then use that knowledge to reduce the cultural conflict around religion and other differences.
Sure.
So you said I was at Catholic University. I did my doctorate there on heresy and orthodoxy in the early
Yeah.
church.
Sure.
And I did that work surrounded by Catholics.
Yeah.
Lots of nuns and
Yeah.
priests
Yeah.
in that environment.
Yeah.
And that knowledge about people and their longing to live rightly in the eyes of God,
Hmm.
or rightly in a moral or ethical framework.
Yeah.
And then about what people are willing to do to each other to achieve that
Hmm.
vision.
Yeah.
All of that about the historical
Hmm.
realities
Yeah.
and what people continue to do to each other, and the horrific things that people do to each other, and the absolutely beautiful ways that people include each other and care for each other and make space for each other. It
Yeah.
is all the same.
Yeah.
So now, I spend most of my time helping organizations and communities navigating that real difference,
Hmm.
and trying to build community that is both truly diverse, and truly welcoming.
Yeah.
And that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah. Your story and mine are different and sort of similar in a way. My mom was diagnosed with MS when I was 3.5. My family had gone through a bankruptcy. I had lost a farm due to the mechanization of farming. And so we'd kind of gone from a rated A family, to a C minus family. And so I watched this, happen to our family and our community. And then one day, a woman, and I experienced, I should say, a lot of great support from our church community. There was a lot of softness toward me. There's a lot of nurturing that happened very positively. But then there was also a woman who walked up to me when I was 7 and said, if your family were better Christians, your mother would not be ill. And so I knew that she meant me ill. And that's when I decided to become a theologian, because what I saw, I'm reading back into my 7-year-old self, but I saw a tradition that was calling us to be our best selves, but often failed to do so in really dramatic ways. And we failed to live up to that. And, a few years ago, many years ago, when that "what would Jesus do" craze was happening, I had a different name for that, which was "who would Jesus dominate?" Because that kind of gets at the in-group, out-group dynamic that I think a lot of Christians bring, that you're really human, and if you're part of our in-group. And the reduction of the theological notion of salvation, which is both a internal healing for people, a relational healing, a societal, economic, environmental healing, reducing that to being accepted as a part of an exclusive in-group. And so, I have found myself the last 34 years of ordained ministry really struggling to figure out how to respond to that, and how to help create a kind of Christianity that is clear about what we're trying to do, but also open to conversation and partnership with other people. And so it's interesting that but we both got persecuted by other Christians. You as an atheist, and me as a kid, as a child of a woman with MS. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that, and it helps people understand who they're listening to here, and help think through their own stories. And so back to kind of the main question of the article and the review. Could you give us a brief idea of why you think bridge building and advocacy movements are failing on their own? What's kind of the Cliff Notes version of that?
Yes. So both ways of being. I'm gonna boil each of these down to a catchphrase to just make it sort of easier.
Yeah.
Activism and advocacy, I'm gonna lump together unfairly.
Yeah.
And then label them as get no justice, give no peace.
Yeah.
So we're gonna say that it's sort of an organizing principle there.
Yep.
And then the other bridging side, you can say, again, totally unfairly to lump it all together, and also say, make friends and forgive grievances.
Mm-hmm.
These are the sort of organizing principles on there.
Sure.
Obviously much more complicated than that. And
Right.
Each of those functionally offers a set of tools, or a tool about how to engage with the world around you.
Yeah.
And each of them just has their limitations. And you've heard the phrase, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
All you do is advocacy. Everything feels like a fight, like you need to advocate, like you need to argue for.
Right.
And maybe that's not actually the best way to get what you want. There might be better ways to do that. And that, maybe it's collaborating with people who you might otherwise argue with.
Yeah.
And do it in a way that encompasses bridging kind of work.
Yeah.
On the other hand, bridging does not, because the nature of bridging in some ways is that you are constrained to work with the people who are willing to show up for you and who you are willing to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't get up far out on the edges of that. And that's both a good thing and that's a bad thing, but that just is what it is. There's limitations around that. And so bridging in some ways can be incredibly creative, but often, because it keeps you tied to people who have very different views, what seems the realm of the possible at first glance is much more limited than in activist spaces. Activist spaces are creative and fermenting and always coming up with these wonderful, fantastic ideas, some of which are fantastic and some of which are terrible, but you don't really know until you sort of play with them and you try them out. And you can't do that creative work if you're tied to the people who feel really different than you right now.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily do that creative work. I actually think that you can do them together, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way. So I will say more about this, but each of those sort of general kind of ways of being just has its failings. There are social processes that, all in addition to those failings, tend to push those types of movements in negative directions that they don't intend to go.
Yeah.
So on their own,
yeah,
they're kind of whole. It's like they sort of list in a direction that they don't really need to go, and that therefore on their own they really don't get where they want to get to.
Yeah. I've often said in the last couple of years when I do presentations that in the United States we're dangerously divided and we're dangerously unequal, and that we need to work on both at the same time. And I have seen, I think you're right, and there's research that you referenced in your article that talk about how sometimes bridging activities can really mute the voice of minoritized communities that have been impacted negatively by societal kind of injustice or systems, and in which their stories are kind of denied because the other people in the room don't want to hear the unnice story. And then I also have seen it on the advocacy side that people are so focused on their advocacy issue and on hammering everybody around them, and they fail to realize, I think, the potential power of relationship with people who are outside of their group, who just have never really heard their story. And I know from my work to counter anti-Muslim bigotry and centered in Washington State that over and over again, people would be moved by their first meeting with a Muslim. And they would walk up sometimes to me and say, I believe some things about them that wasn't true. And my heart's been fearful about them. And I need to do some work now. And I think, part of the question is, can we have a third option between either doing bridging or advocacy action? Are there third options, somehow in this conversation? And I think that's what a lot of us are trying to figure out right now, actually. So, one of the key concepts of bridge building, which of course paths to understanding, that's more our focus. but we're starting to partner with other organizations that help to hopefully get towards some of that third kind of possibility. One of the key theories is contact theory. And could you give us just a brief overview of that theory and when it can be effective and potential downfalls of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So contact theory is the idea that contact between individuals who belong to different groups can foster the development of more positive outgroup attitudes.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as it's hard to hate up close.
Yeah.
Right. That's sort of basic idea.
Sure.
My colleague Michelle Garrett and I wrote a short primer on contact theory, which I can give you for the show notes. If anybody wants to check that out, there's more. There's just more there. So I'm a historian by training, right? So I got to do a little history.
Sure.
This theory was developed in the 1950s because desegregation was going better than expected. Mm-hmm. Amazingly, there were many folks who thought that there were going to be race riots like the Tulsa race, on the magnitude of the Tulsa race riots,
sure.
In every town and city. And that is not what happened. In fact, kids made friends with each other and people learned to work together.
Yeah.
And so folks were sort of wondering, like, why is this going so well? And so the sort of seminal work is the 1954 book, The Nature of Prejudice by Gordon Allport. And so since then, the contact theory has been revised, practiced, studied extensively. It has a bunch of different defined variations. There's extended contact. That's when you have a friend who has a friend.
Yes.
There's vicarious contact, like when you see a TV show where there's a diverse cast getting along, for example. There's imagined contacts where you literally just imagine having a positive interaction with somebody who's different from you.
Sure.
And then there's single identity and dual identity frameworks, which I want to get into more later. But single identity is the idea that we drop all of our various labels and we just become the new us, whatever that us is appropriate in a particular context. Maybe it's we're all from this small town, we all care about it, we all want to do good for it, so this we're gonna be together on this.
Sure.
Dual identity is where you keep your own variety of other identities and you work together to create that new single identity, the common identity. So I'm going to come back to dual and single identity stuff later. You asked, when does it work? When is it effective?
Right.
So Allport originally laid out 4 conditions, and this is always about status. Group difference, almost always about status. So equal status during the contact, working toward common goals, intergroup cooperation, and support from authorities or institutions. Those are the 4 that he laid out. There's an additional condition that's been suggested, which is repeated and sustained contact over time makes this work better.
Yeah.
So does it actually work? I say this, and then I know you have a follow-up.
Sure.
Even in imperfect conditions, contact theory shows consistent, modest, but positive attitude change.
Mm-hmm.
So consistent but modest, positive attitude change. You can pretty consistently make people feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy toward each other than they did going in. Lots of caveats, but start with that positive frame.
Yeah. Yeah. In our program, Let's Go Together here in Skagit County, we take a cohort of people from this last year. We had 100 people from 35 different kind of groups. So traditions, cultures, economic situations, life circumstances, like for instance, if someone was formerly incarcerated, ages, identities, and we bring them together and we put them at tables, and we take them through kind of a three gathering process. The first one is to eat and share stories, very controlled, very just human questions, no theology, no politics, kind of a little bit of a break from the ideological civil war, if you will. And people are all relieved, and they walk out of there just so happy. The second event is a service project day, which by nature means that they can walk up to each other. And as Peter Block says, they can choose who they want to be in community with. This community has to be chosen, And then the third event is a public event where people get to see some representatives of these groups stand up and talk about when they first became committed to the idea that we're all human beings, to our common humanity. And so part of our process here is to not only do those 4 or 5 things that you talked about, but also over time now, as this is the part we're starting now, is to deepen the kind of stories that we hear from each other. So the next step is to really say, okay, what were some of the stories and challenges for the Indigenous communities here in Skagit County, named for an Indigenous group that most people don't know exists, right? And what is the story of farm workers who are here in the Valley? What are some of the stories of the farmers that are struggling to make it here in this Valley, and on and on. And so that's kind of part of the next step is can we invite people, now that they kind of know each other, to go into a deeper form of storytelling, and then eventually some collective action. And so anyway, that's kind of the base of what we're trying to do here. And it's very complicated. And we know that maybe only 80 or 70 of the people who've gone through it are going to be game for the harder stories.
Yep.
But again, those people go back and they share those stories in their own communities. And it slowly starts to build a wave of I think some greater compassion, some of it vicarious, of course.
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact idea of extended or vicarious contact, that you sort of, know somebody who knows somebody, or you see somebody who knows somebody, and it's positive. It's like, all right, well, that person survived that encounter, and seems all right for it.
Yeah.
And I love the idea about getting into personal story with your groups too, because the definition of contact doesn't talk about what it can be structured in a million different ways. And one of the really great ways to do that is by developing empathy, right? There's all of this other research on empathy. I'm not even going to get into that.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what you're doing is developing that an empathic lens on who are you as a person, who is somebody else as a human being.
Right.
And then that again works to humanize folks, and maybe we share something in common, and that works on that understanding of who is our we. That's the sociological part of one of the things that works about bridging, is that it puts people who didn't used to be in your in group,
right.
Sort of reorganizing those boundaries.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, we even called the program "Let's Go Together," which we wanted a phrase that like a 3 or 4 year old would use, but we also wanted one that included the idea that we're going to still be part of an in group or several in groups, and then we're going to be part of this larger thing. So this kind of invitational movement, into something new. But in the conversation with leaders, which we spent 18 months doing that, we had to tell leaders of different communities that may have been more conservative around some issues. I hate that term, but everybody knows what it means, kind of. You're going to have your stump speech ready why it's okay for you to be in a public partnership with an LGBTQ organization. And I had to say the same thing to the LGBTQ organization.
Exactly right.
And what I would say to them is, remember to tell your people that on one day, you can advocate for a series of public policies that agree with your theology, philosophy, and so forth. On another day, you can build community with people that you disagree with and actually do positive things with them. And I would say in a democracy, we have to learn to do this, or else our democracy is toast. So that's kind of the thing we had to do to sort of help them go, okay, now I see that because we're just not very good at navigating intergroup identity right now.
Yeah. There's so much. I didn't plan to talk about this. There's so much purity concern from both what we might term the right and the left, that there's a lot of reputational risk about who are you with, and why are you speaking with them, and who are you platforming, and all of that stuff. And that the dynamics of the social dynamics of purity are really dangerous for community togetherness, and frankly do terrible things to the people that are cut out, and encourage people to do terrible things to each other. There's so much history about that. So I think it's really smart to do that very direct communication. Listen, you are gonna do this thing, and you should really need to talk about this thing openly,
Yes.
and why what you're doing doesn't necessarily violate your values. You're leaning into this value instead of violating that one. All that kind of stuff is super important.
Yeah, and I think we're in a moment, Allison, and I maybe not just a moment. I think it's maybe a decade where people are becoming more convinced that we really do have a problem in this area. And so there's it seems to me there's increasing openness everywhere I go. If I go to a Kiwanis club or a Rotary club or a church, a mosque, or a temple or some other nonprofit, everyone's going, yeah, we realize we're all isolated. And we often groups behave as if no other group exists. And so one day I was with the Kiwanians, and I love the Kiwanians. They're great. They do wonderful work here. And I said, well, the idea here is to get together and have food and conversation with people from different groups. And all the Kiwanians lifted up their hands and said, hey, that's what we're doing. And I said, well, when was the last time the Kiwanians met with another group? Because they've become their own group. It was a bridge building, partly organization that has now become its own in-group and its own, in a way, tradition. And so really interesting to watch people go, oh, and so I think a lot of folk are living in the 1960s as if some of the social connections that existed then exist now. And they simply don't, according to research. So we have to be so much more intentional. So, but then of course, we have the advocacy and activism world, and work to address inequities in society and so forth. And in your article, you also talk about how these can spark a kind of backlash that actually sort of reverberates through society. So did I read that right? And could you say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. We often think of the word backlash as like, in the context of progressive movement, I'm going to use the word conservative, but it doesn't necessarily mean politically conservative, but the hanging on to tradition and the status quo sense of conservatism, push back against whatever the social change is. And so that can sometimes be, sometimes folks think of it like, oh, white backlash to the civil rights movement, for example.
Sure.
And so, yes, that's a form of backlash. But it's become like I don't know, one of those sort of labels that you throw at something in order to like make it go away, rather than thinking about backlash as a social process or a set of social processes that not only change other people, but can also change yourself and your own movement in ways that make it really important to think about and to plan for strategically. And the person whose work helped me understand this is Ruth Bronstein. She's a sociologist. She's now at Agora, SNF Agora Institute. And she wrote this fabulous article on backlash surrounding the religious right and the rise of the religious right.
Yes.
So the first learning from that for me is that backlash can be accounted for and strategized around, right? And that it can change my own movement. And not just can, like it will create not just an external backlash, but an internal change also to my own movement. And it's possible that can change the thing that I am doing in unexpected and possibly undesirable ways.
Yes.
And the way that she writes about this in the religious right movement is that movement, of course, ended up in places that its founders did not envision and would not have wanted it to go, right? Yep. So we're talking about Billy Graham, for example. Yep. Perhaps he envisioned the access to political power, fine, but he did not I do not think that Billy Graham envisioned the abandonment of theologically conservative principles around, for example, faithfulness in marriage,
Yeah, that's right.
that much of the current iteration of the religious right has been willing to abandon.
Absolutely.
That the way that the backlash that Bronstein identifies is that many tens of thousands, possibly more, Americans have left religion because they looked at what the religious right was doing and said, "Well, that is not me."
Sure.
So I'm sure that's an unintended consequence that Billy Graham did not plan for.
Right.
People leave the faith. And then the shifting of internal priorities inside his own movement. Like it's sort of heartrending,
Right.
and yeah, so we can look at backlash in that context. We can also look at backlash on the left, and
Yes.
both that broad backlash, which maybe we saw in the last election,
Hmm.
and narrow backlash. What are the social dynamics that are pushing the left, have been pushing the left this way, and that sort of internal social purification stuff that's
Yes.
been going on,
Yes.
shaping that movement and taking it to places that maybe it didn't want to go.
Right.
And it's very hard when you're in it to see what's happening. If you're in it, you're in it. You're sort of swimming around in the stream, right? You can't pick yourself up and out of it and get a 30,000-foot view.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do that. So that's one of the things, like, I want to say that for those of us who are not necessarily in the activist space, or who are working more broadly in the pro-democracy, pro-social cohesion kinds of spaces,
Hmm.
to be aware of those tensions and to help folks who are deeply in those spaces to also be aware of those tensions. Say, like, we
Yeah.
should back up for a second and ask the question about whether we're still headed in the direction we meant to go.
Well, this is another way to say, I mean, I wonder if another way to say that isn't that yes, there's maybe a general kind of backlash that will come at the result of any change. And as a leader of congregations, until about 10 years ago, I was a parish pastor for 25 years, you have to do a lot of work to even make small changes in the community. And there needs to be people in the community who are willing to say yes to this. It can't be something that you're imposing on people as a positional leader, like a pastor or a rabbi or an imam. But it kind of tends to create in society a tremendous amount of intergroup rivalry. And then so it seems like there's tremendous disrespect that I receive as a pastor for engaging in work to support Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, agnostics. I mean, I get a tremendous amount of question like, why are you hanging out with them instead of trying to convert them? That question came
Yeah.
to me over and over again in every one. And so I developed from the tradition, from the Christian tradition and the Abrahamic traditions generally, a set of responses to that. And what was interesting in that is that the people who came to me were not expecting me to have a biblical response to why
Yeah.
it's not okay to other people who you may disagree with theologically or around traditions. And so
Yeah.
the conversation would typically go like this. They'd say, why are you doing that? And I'd say, well, because Jesus did. That was my first answer, because Jesus did. And then they would say, what do you mean? I said, well, Jesus answered a question about, who's my neighbor, which is really a question
Yeah.
about who's really human, by telling
Yeah.
a positive story about a Samaritan. And I said,
Yeah.
and so if Jesus is going to do that, I'm going to do that. And then very quickly we would get into the idea that Christianity is an exclusive in group and only Christians are really human, and that conversations about God loving us or about going to heaven or hell really aren't theological questions. They're questions about the status of the community in the here and now, and who's in and who's
Yeah.
out. And so, boy, that's the maelstrom in which I live so much of my life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's faith traditions and communities of faith, they're so fabulously good, can be so fabulously good at creating such a wraparound sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And there's so much that's wonderful in that. And
Yes.
it is very easy for that sense of belonging to turn outward into a sense of othering.
Absolutely. And yet I think in a way, I mean, my own life is kind of a testament that it can also produce the other response, which is I'm going to risk myself for other people that are human because of what I've experienced in my tradition, right? And that's sort of the painful, the painful irony, of a tradition is that it can lead us to sacrifice, to risk for the other, but it can also lead us to other the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's life. It's
Yeah,
being human.
it is. I try to say about the Abrahamic tradition that, in Genesis 12, the idea is that, yes, it's good to have an in-group and a tradition, but the creator's purpose in creating in-groups is ultimately to be a blessing to other in-groups. And when I take Christians through that, and I've been in over 400 congregations doing this kind of work, they're often surprised because they've never thought of it that way. They think of God as their mascot, their God, not the God of all humanoid life forms and the planet. They're just not thinking like that. Right. So, okay. So thank you for indulging me in that part of that conversation there. So what are some of the gifts of the interfaith or multi-faith movement, for this kind of moment? What are some of these gifts broadly? Are there a few you'd like to kind of lift up here? And then we'll make sure and have the link to your article so they can see all of them. And I wrote a little blog post back in July about this excellent article that you wrote. And I think it's going to really help me in the work I do to try to help interfaith, multi-faith groups across Washington State initiate some bridge building work with their whole community. So I just want to commend you again for the article, but I'd like to hear about what kind of gifts the multi-faith interfaith movement has for this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, before we get to that, I want to go back one step.
Yeah.
And we talked super briefly at the beginning about bridge building being in tension with advocacy and what it is.
Yeah.
That what can be, in fact, detrimental to
Sure.
advocacy about bridge building, because I said something a minute ago that might make folks in the advocacy space go, whoa, hold up.
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
Sure, no problem.
And I need to say similar words to folks who are in the bridging space, because when I learned what I'm about to say, I had a moment. And me as a lifelong bridger was like, whoa, I need to pause and think about what it is that I'm doing here.
Yeah.
So 3 things about that. Yes, bridge building can actually actively undermine advocacy and activism. And yes, that is a real problem.
Yeah.
So irony of harmony is one of these effects. It's where disadvantaged people who participate in bridging come to actually underperceive violent bias against themselves. And then, of course, you don't see it. You're not going to work to do anything about it.
That's right.
The second issue, especially in single identity contact situations, again, I'm going to come back to single versus dual. The single identity contact situation reduces attachments to subgroups. So if you come into a bridging situation and it's like, drop whatever your other identities are, it's all just us now. Well, it turns out that psychosociologically, it's those attachments to the subgroup identity and the existence of those group boundaries that makes people want to engage in collective action. So again, actively undermining activism.
Yeah.
And the third thing to watch out for is the principal implementation gap, where I said at the beginning, you can make people feel warm and fuzzy about each other. Sure. That does not necessarily mean that they are going to actually do something positive. So there's a big difference there.
That's right.
And those 3 things together, I think bridgers need to sit up and pay attention to those effects. They'll say dual identity contact has better effects than single identity contact and all of those, but those are real ethical challenges to what it is we are doing. We meaning me included.
Yes.
And then to get to what it is that I think multi-faith organizations have to offer to both bridging orientations and to advocacy orientations. I named 6 in the article. So dual identity contact, tolerating disagreement, shifting constellations of allies and partners, shattering binaries, the fact that they get local, and the fact that they reach far.
Right.
So it's just incredible things that religious communities often have, and multi-faith organizations often have. So I want to talk about 3 of those. I want to start with that dual identity thing.
Yeah, please.
So dual identity, again, is where a contact or bridging initiative brings folks together to create or deepen a common identity and allows folks to continue to celebrate their other identities. You sometimes see this outside of the faith space and in racial justice work that's done really well, where you have race affinity groups. So you have folks do their own work in their own racial affinity groups, and then they come together in the bigger group. And that is an instance of dual identity contact, where you're really allowing folks to be all of who they are in one sense, and also be all of who we are in another sense.
Right.
Multi-faith organizations do this. Most of them, not all of them, most of them do this really quite naturally. I know you do this in your work, Terry, and I want to lift up another organization that I've worked with that I think does this really well. Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, who's run by Pastor Bob Roberts, Imam Majid, and Rabbi David Saperstein.
Sure.
We bring rabbis, imams, and evangelical pastors together in local settings around the country and around the world. And they don't say, like, hey, we all worship the same God, so let's get along. That would just be straight, single identity contact. Instead, their frame is, what does your own religious traditions call to treat each other as, to how you should treat other human beings, like you just said.
That's right.
In your tradition, there are real resources there for you to call on that are personally meaningful to you as an individual. So they do that, and then they help those clergy build resilience together with their congregations and in their towns. That's dual identity contact, done really well. And lots of other multi-faith or interfaith organizations do that really beautifully. So that's the one thing that I think multi-faith organizations can share with everybody. The shifting constellations thing, I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about kind of what's possible. This concept is particularly helpful in coalition settings. So I know a number of multi-faith organizations that are doing advocacy of one kind or another. Some of the most successful of them are the ones that can shift their partnership alliances from issue to issue. So let me explain, like, sort of the math about how this works. So if you have, like, say you have about 50 potential partners, right? And you have maybe 5 priorities, and you can get all 50 on board with maybe 3 each of the priorities, but they're not all the same. They don't share those 3. They're, very different, deep disagreements about some of them between them. And of those 50, you've got maybe 10 of your potential partners who are, like, really on board with you with all 5. How far are you going to get with only 10 partners? Probably not that far. Even if you were able to win that, now you've got 40 other people who are irritated with you.
That's right.
So the other way to do this is to say, is to have, you were talking about having these, like, very clear conversations about where differences are. Is to say, say you have 2 of your 5 priorities are women's health, that includes abortion, and environmental protection. And you go to your Catholic partners and you say, we're not going to be together on the women's health initiative. I know that. I respect your position. I'm going to see you on the other side of the protest line. I'll see
Yeah.
you there. I wish you well when I see you there.
Right.
And you have this papal encyclical
Yes.
Laudato Si
Yes.
that promotes, care for the created world. And we really agree on these issues. Can I work with you on this?
Yes.
And if you can do that and really open, really clear conversations where even on the issues where you disagree, you say, I respect our disagreement.
Yeah.
I support your right to disagree with me on this.
Yeah.
I will see you on the, out in the confrontation lines,
Yeah.
and that's okay. We're going to partner here. Then you can get to a place where maybe you have 40 of your organizations with you on every single one of those
Right.
5 priority areas. And that's incredibly powerful.
Yes.
Incredibly powerful. It really expands not only what you can get done, but it's so much more incredible to say, look, here I am with my conservative Muslims and my Catholics and my liberal evangelicals, and we're all standing together on this issue,
right,
even though we're gonna fight it out tomorrow on something else. When you can really bring that's incredibly powerful for public advocacy work. Like, just so much more powerful than bringing the 10 people who agree with you on all 5 things.
Yeah.
So there's a phrase that I learned from a broad-based community, faith-based community organizer, that I quote in my article, that there are no permanent enemies and no permanent allies. Mm-hmm. And that is so exactly right on for this kind of work.
So kind of everybody's in, but people can opt out of certain priorities of the group.
Exactly. And you're just, the trick to doing that is to say, look, I have to be really clear. This is what this is what our organization is going to do. And I know that you're going to fight me on this one issue. And I respect you and your viewpoints.
Yeah.
And let's work together where we can. Let's sort of partner where we can.
Yeah.
Is just super, super powerful.
Yes.
And I think the last thing is on shattering binaries.
Mm-hmm.
We all know there is no real left-right binary. Sometimes we've heard about the U-shaped theory of politics or other sorts of ways to conceptualize, but this is not about left-right, but somehow or another we're thinking about it in these terms anyway.
Right.
Folks who live in this multi-faith space are much more likely, I think, to have to recognize, like the example I gave about Catholics who are going to be quite likely to be pro climate change action and environmental protection and anti-abortion, obviously.
Right.
By the way, both of those are pro-life issues.
Sure.
Sure. So it kind of, once you understand those nuances, it takes you out of that left-right binary and allows you to see things in much more creative ways. That's why I said earlier, actually, you can do bridging and advocacy in really creative ways, but it takes a lot of work. Yeah. And it's a little bit mind-bending when you do it. One of the projects I first worked on when I got to Aspen was working with Asma Uddin on connecting evangelical Christians and socially conservative Muslims on religious freedom, which, by the way, again, not theist here.
Yeah, I know. That was amazing.
Are not going to be my religious freedom concerns.
I understand.
But the way that they could connect on that issue when there was so much cultural animosity between these two groups otherwise, it kind of, it took what looked like a wall and turned it into a road to walk on.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so astonishing to be able to kind of turn your head sideways and look at this problem in this whole other way and to see some kind of path forward. And it's that kind of wait, where is the left and right again? Oh, right. Left, right don't really exist, actually. That's a construct.
Right.
What is actually possible? Let's talk about that. And that, again, is a really powerful lesson from the multi-faith space.
Yeah. And that is a kind of, analogy to, or a similar idea, the idea of rights, of individual and group rights in the United States, is similar to the idea of neighbor. that you love
Yeah.
neighbor. Love doesn't mean emotionally feel warm feelings. It means that we have a certain responsibility for the well-being of our neighbor within our larger community. So when I
That's
talk
right.
with evangelical conservatives, around the work to counter anti-Muslim bigotry, I learned, back there listening to all of you do that work in Aspen a little bit when I was there. I just begin with rights, with the idea of civil rights, and that is that yes, we can contest certain ideas, but we also have to guard the rules of the game. And I remember this playing basketball as a kid. So we were poor, but I had keys to the gym, and my dad would play basketball with me all the time. But he would tell me, so Terry, remember that you're competing with your enemy, with your opponent, right? But you also have to guard the game.
That's right.
And you're not, and it's not just the refs and the coaches and the rule book that is doing that. You have to guard the game too. And just because someone else breaks the rule and hits you in the stomach with their elbow on purpose doesn't mean that you should do that back. And I think what's happened is that we think that we're not playing this game of society with each other as opponents. We're playing against each other, and some are willing to throw out the rule book in order to win at the moment. And so part of what we're trying to do here next, Allison, is I don't really know how it's going to go, but so we're building this movement to get people together. We're then going to do some deeper storytelling. And then the next step is to work with Better Together America and some people here locally to create a civic hub. And what we're going to be saying to people across the valley, including people on the progressive left that sort of have their own advocacy, kind of political organizations, but also to people more on the right, that this is going to be a transpartisan space where we're going to come and have some of these harder conversations. And so what we're trying to do at PTU is kind of build relationships, build capacity, and then help to funnel people or invite people into this larger kind of conversation where we can start to see to bring some of these multi-faith sort of attitudes to some of this work, to say, yes, I can see that you deeply hold this value. And on these 3 things, we're going to differ. But on these 4 things, we're going to agree. And can we begin to have that conversation in a more productive way? And I don't know if it's going to work, Allison. I have no idea. And then across the state, we're going to be inviting interfaith organizations. And I'm going to use these 6 things that you've identified, these 6 strengths that you've identified, to try to help them say, okay, can you meet as an interfaith organization? But can you also start to think about what are some of the other groups that you can begin to invite into conversation and make explicit these 6 gifts, that we're going to strive to live these out here in this conversation with people of different cultures or just people of different groups. It doesn't matter what the group is. And it's going to be interesting to see if we can encourage the interfaith movement, because I think the interfaith movement has done some of this in-grouping stuff itself often.
Yeah.
That they form, they storm, they norm, they become an in-group, they brick up the front door, and then they're their own thing. And eventually, after so many reunions, they of course fail. And I see that happening all the time out here. And so can we begin to realize that we're divided by more than tradition, but bring some of these multi-faith kind of gifts and sensibilities to some broader differences, broader in-group or group-to-group work. And I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Well, Godspeed.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. And of course, Paths to Understanding, we're going to stay within our own, kind of missional space. We're doing bridge building, but we want to be part of coalitions that provide a more of a whole society response, to the kind of problem.
No, I love that. That's great. I'm sort of a systems thinker. It's just sort of the way that my brain works.
Yeah.
And I've thought for a long time about about the large set of bridging organizations in the states. They're all doing different kinds of things. Some of them
Yes.
are doing, get together and have a meal and then we're done. Some of them are more, we'll do a service project but never talk about anything hard, and
Yeah.
that's okay. Or all these different varieties of the ways folks do this.
Yes.
And it feels to me like there's a would be an opportunity for folks who are doing the bridging work to connect with other folks doing slightly different things, sort of a ladder of engagement, or marketing
Yes.
funnel. You can use sort of different terminology for this,
Yes.
but like, hey, let's have let's meet people, have a meal, start to talk, is a great, like, a low
Right.
low danger, low risk
Right.
first step.
Yeah.
And then if folks become comfortable, then some of them are going to move on to something that's more
Yes.
engaging in public life,
Yes.
more civically engaged, whether that's in, participating in an advocacy initiative or joining a civic assembly or something else, and I think that, like, I see so much potential for bridging organizations to connect and collaborate
Yes.
on the edges of what it is that they're doing without trying to do everything all at once. And
Yeah.
so I'm so excited when you're talking about this work. I'm like, yes, that is exactly the thing that I think is really great, to allow
Yeah.
connections, allow someone to easily take the next step.
Yeah, I think so. So first of all, as I've been getting to know more, bridge building organizations, and for a while we were just focused on Washington State, but in the last year or two, I've begun to do a lot more networking again, and I was just really enjoying that before the pandemic. Flying out to be with you all, and learning what other people are thinking out there. But really, in the last year and a half, began to do much more networking. And what I saw was that, first of all, funders have to learn to reward organizations for preparing people for work with other organizations, because the goal isn't to get more and more and more people in paths to understanding. The goal is to help communities learn to see each other as neighbors and as human beings, and to recognize the strength of a pluralistic democracy. And so there's going to come a point where some of the folk are going to have learned what they can learn with us, and they are ready to go on and work with Braver Angels or with some other organization. And number two, what I noticed was that as I began to ask other bridging organizations to say, well, what are kind of the conditions in which people are ready to engage with the work you do? And many of them had zero answer for that. And so what we're hoping to do here is, to kind of think of the Civic Hub as kind of the and the sort of the leadership team of that Civic Hub, to be able to call in a lot of these different kinds of tools and resources, not just about bridging, but about, pro-democracy stuff, or civic education, or civil debate, or thinking about, how journalists do their work to provide information about the community. But to think of the Civic Hub as kind of the locus of who sort of calls in folk to work with each other. But then in conversation with the Braver Angels folk here, it's been really great. They've got some communities where they think our potluck project needs to happen first before they can do some of their political stuff. And we think that we've got some people that are ready for Braver Angels. And so can we start bridging with each other, instead of competing, which of course is where philanthropy needs to change, I think, tremendously. But that's a different topic too, I know.
I know. It's another one. Do a whole other podcast on that later.
Yeah. So Allison, I know it's been about an hour here. I thank you so much for your time and your effort, and like the years of like daily obsessing and thinking about all these things and all your experience. I just so appreciate it. And I so appreciated your leadership, when I was able to witness it there at the Aspen Institute. I know I saw a tiny fraction of it, but you've always had my utmost respect. And I'm just honored that you spent some time with us today. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. huge gratitude for your invitation here. I was so touched when you told me my work was meaningful to you. That makes me feel seen. Just amazing. Such a gift, and you're inviting me here today to talk about it again is another gift as well. So thank you. It's such a pleasure. I've loved it.
Well, thank you, Allison. And again, I'm going to be using those 6 things. I think I told you I think it'd be fun to have like a 2-pager or something that could kind of help interfaith organizations even recognize some of their practices a bit, because I think some of them have 3 or 4 or 5 of them, but maybe they don't even know how to name them. I think sometimes that naming is really important, but we'll keep collaborating on that. And so I just want to thank everyone also for listening. This is the Wisdom from Our Neighborhood, part of the Paths to Understanding podcast, available everywhere and on our YouTube channel. And until we see you again, be well, be calm, be active, and be good to your neighbors.